Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Larry Parks Show. I'm Larry Parks, and this is the Extreme Consumer Activism Show, how ordinary people get ripped off by the system. And tonight I'm going to be speaking about how the United States monetary system violates Jewish law. Now, it turns out that today there's a great deal of anti-Semitism in the world, and I think this is true for the 20th century as well, having to do with the money issue. And a lot of times Jewish people are somehow connected to the fraudulent monetary systems that we have around the world. And while it's true that Jewish people have been visible, it turns out that the actual fraud was put in place by Gentiles and that Jews had nothing to do with it whatsoever. But more importantly, the whole system violates Jewish law. So how can Jewish people be responsible for something that the rabbis condemn? Particularly, it violates a very important prohibition in Torah. And that prohibition is called Genivas Das. Let me just put up the first slide, please. This is my introductory slide. Let's go. This is, one just before that. The one just before that, George. This is really how the monetary system violates Jewish law. And the Jewish law, come back to me, please. And the Jewish law we're going to be speaking about is something called Genivas Das. Genivas is the Hebrew word. The root word is ganav, which is a thief. Genivas means to steal. It's the verb form of the Jewish word to steal. Das is your mind, literally to steal your mind, but really to steal your perception. Now, the next few slides come from a terrific essay that I took off the internet. It's written by a guy named Hershey Friedman. So let me just go to that next slide, please. So really, the Genivas Das commandment in Jewish law is a prohibition against deception. The literal meaning of Genivas Das in Hebrew is theft of one's mind's thoughts, wisdom, or knowledge. That is, fooling someone and thereby causing him or her to have mistaken assumption, belief, or impression. And it's really this mistaken belief or impression that the monetary system has, which is why, in its core, it violates Jewish law. Thus, the term is used in Jewish law to indicate deception, cheating, creating false impression. Again, false impression is the key concept here, and acquiring undeserved goodwill. Let's go to the next slide, please. The Genivas Das commandment goes beyond lying. Any words or actions that cause others to form incorrect conclusions about one's motives might be a violation of this prohibition. One does not have the right to diminish the ability of another person, Jew or Gentile, to make a fair or honest evaluation, whether in business or in interpersonal relationships. Come back to me, please. Now, this is a very strong prohibition. The idea is you're supposed to be honest in your dealings. And what I'm going to show you, without any doubt, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond doubt whatsoever, the money part of our system violates this Jewish law. Let's go to the next slide, please. So again, on this business of prohibition against deception, prohibition against Genivas Das is included in the transgression, you shalt not steal. So in other words, it's part of the Ten Commandments. And Torah explicitly states, distance yourself from a false matter. And go to the next slide, please. Now this shows the importance of this prohibition. The sages believe that there are 7 types of thieves, and of these, the most egregious is the one who steals the minds of the people. And you'll see in just a few moments how the minds of the people have been deceived when it comes to our money. And finally, the next slide, please. Genivas Das is not a minor prohibition. One of the important rabbis says that Absalom, the son of King David, deserved death for violating the Torah law against Genivas Das. So, last slide on this one. Jewish law misrepresenting the very strongly held views of the founders on paper money and legal tender. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. At another time, I'm going to be talking about misrepresentations on the paper money itself, misrepresenting the provisions of the Constitution, and misrepresentation by banks. Come back to me, please. So again, what I'm going to be speaking about tonight is what the founders had to say about paper money. And actually the most important founders of our country. Let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to be talking in particular about what Thomas Jefferson had to say, what George Washington said, what James Madison said, what Alexander Hamilton said, and Thomas Paine, and all of you know who they were. Come back to me, please. Perhaps one of the most important founders of our country was Thomas Jefferson, and he condemned paper money. He said it was a cheat. And he wasn't talking off the top of his head. He wasn't some country bumpkin. He was very educated about money. In fact, as the ambassador to France after the Revolution, it was Thomas Jefferson to whom it fell to negotiate with the British and the Dutch who had helped finance the Revolution. And so he was coming in contact in those days with the most sophisticated, most knowledgeable financial people in the planet. And so Jefferson's understanding of money was very deep indeed. And again, he had this very visceral hate for paper money, and it really had to do with something that happened in his life which really contributed pretty much to ruining his personal life, not his public life, for his entire life. And what happened was Jefferson was married to the daughter of a very rich man in the colonies. His name was Eppie. He was a plantation owner and a slaveholder, and she had 2 siblings. And when his father-in-law died, he left an estate with assets of something on the order of 37,000 pounds and liabilities of roughly 20,000 pounds. Now, to put this into perspective for you today, 100 pounds in those days was pretty much a year's salary. So this was a huge estate. In today's money, it would be like $100+ million estate. Both Jefferson and the siblings of his wife, because of the great disparity between the assets and the liabilities, felt comfortable in taking the assets into their own names prior to settling the estate. The law at that time, and I think it's probably the law today, is that if you take over the assets of an estate, you are liable for the liabilities of the estate. But again, the cushion was so great, 37,000 pounds in assets, 20,000 pounds in liabilities, they felt comfortable in doing that. The liabilities were owed primarily to British financiers in gold and silver, particularly gold. The assets were in land in Virginia. And so there came a time in the early 1770s when Jefferson and his wife's sibling sold the land. And in those days, people in Virginia didn't have a lot of money. And so the way they bought it was to, in effect, give back a mortgage, which they called bonds, and then they'd pay off the bonds. So Jefferson and the siblings took 37,000 pounds in bonds from the buyers of the property, and the buyers got the property and busy paying off the bonds. But then the Revolution started in 1776, and Virginia issued paper money and made it legal tender. And as what happens with all paper money, the purchasing power of that money started to approach zero, and what do you know? The people to whom Jefferson had sold the land paid him off with virtually worthless paper money. But Jefferson still owed the creditors in England. And the creditors, he had in a prior time, he had offered them the bonds that the buyers paid him. And they said no. They said they wanted specie, and of course, why should they take counterparty risks? And so now, pretty much, he lost the assets to the estate, and he still owed the debt. And so he had this visceral feel for what a cheat it was to have paper money, and he was indebted his entire life. These days, by the way, Jefferson is chided because he had slaves and he didn't free those slaves. Well, you know what, folks? They weren't his to free. They were really subject to the debts that Jefferson owed to the creditors. He wasn't free to dispose of any of this stuff. It was all hypothecated to the creditors. At the end of his life, he was pretty much bankrupt, and after he died, all of his possessions were auctioned off, and he lost control of the estate, Monticello. And so the whole business with paper money was a disaster for Jefferson. And here's what Jefferson had to say about paper money. Let's go to the next slide, please.